The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 18571 in the name of Alistair Allen on the 10th anniversary of Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I ask those members who want to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Alistair Allen to open the debate. Mr Allen, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to be bringing forward tonight's debate, celebrating the 10th anniversary of Food and Drink Fortnight, an event which has helped to ensure that Scotland's outstanding food and drink industries are now starting to get the profile they've long deserved. Can I begin by thanking the many members who've signed my motion and those who are taking part in tonight's debate. I also hope that as many members as can will be able to join us for the reception afterwards for a chance to meet the industry and hopefully sample some of their wares. I don't expect extra time from the Presiding Officer for the fact that I have a cold, but I will keep going. There are a huge range of exciting developments happening across the country in Scotland's food and drink sector, and I fully intend to abuse my position as the mover of tonight's motion in order to draw as many examples from my own constituency as I feel I can get away with. However, Scotland nationally has a fantastic story to tell. Our produce enjoys an enviable reputation at home and abroad. The sector is a key pillar of the Scottish economy, directly employing 45,000 people and producing a record turnover last year of £14.8 billion, with £6.3 billion in exports alone. Now, as members are aware, the importance of the sector extends far beyond direct employment and far beyond, it should be said, rural constituencies. It is a truly national industry. Only last month, Enterprise Minister Jamie Hepburn came to my own island constituency to open the new Loomshed Brewery in the Isle of Harris. Harris is, of course, already well known for its gin, and the distillery in Harris is now also quietly maturing the first batches of its own malt whisky, which are already exciting considerable interest in the whisky world, even before the Angels have yet had time to claim much of their own share. North Uist too now has its own gin distillery, while Lewis has Avonjaric whisky, and meanwhile the Western Isles continue to be famed for the production of everything from salmon and scallops to biscuits and black pudding, prawns, fudge, lamb and lobster. Across Scotland, food producers are too numerous to mention. I leave the task of naming some of them today to their respective local MSPs. We shouldn't underestimate, however, the sheer demand that exists around the world for, to take but three obvious examples, Scotch whisky, Scotch beef and Scottish salmon. And that is before we even consider Scotland's production of haggis, marmalade, confectionery, raspberries, tatties or a host of other products. Farmers, fishermen, crofters, distillers, brewers, dairies, factories and countless other food producers are also increasingly aware of the links which their own businesses have with tourism, a link which actively and positively contributes towards the overall visitor experience of Scotland. The days when distilleries actively discouraged visitors in the belief that these visitors might be undercover spies from rival distilleries are long gone. Whisky tourism now forms a central part of many distilleries' business model, as new markets everywhere from Sweden to China are opened up by people who discover whisky while they're on their holidays. Indeed, it would be fair to say that we have come a long way in Scotland's tourist industry more generally. Tourists now come with high expectations, not just about the quality, but about the local provenance of what they eat. Visitors, whether they are eating in restaurants or staying in self-catering accommodation, rightly expect to be able to obtain local food, something which in the past was sometimes easier said than done. We do still have a long way to go towards persuading some supermarkets about the benefits of stocking local produce, or even in some cases the benefits of marking Scottish produce as Scottish produce, but we are making progress on all fronts. Despite the very occasional, much publicised attempt at cultural appropriation of an iconic Scottish product, the overwhelming number of producers recognise that Made in Scotland represents a very attractive label to put on anything. Presiding Officer, the programme for government presented to this Parliament last week contained a number of welcome points of importance to the food and drink industry. The ambition of Scotland as a good food nation, where people benefit from and take pride and pleasure in the food we produce, buy, cook, serve and eat every day, is, I hope, something that everyone across the chamber can support. Vital and warmly welcome, though the tourists are, Scotland's food obviously is not just for them, but can contribute to a sense of place and well-being that benefits those who live here and those who visit in equal measure. The commitment, to lay before Parliament a Good Food Nation bill to underpin the significant work already being carried out to achieve this ambition has been widely welcomed. So it was very encouraging to see commitments from the Scottish Government that will continue to promote and encourage more local sourcing of Scottish produce through public sector contracts, so that we will see more Scottish produce served in our schools, colleges, universities, hospitals, care homes and prisons. It is major public sector contracts close to home, such as these, that make the world of difference to our food industry and show Scotland's commitment to tackling food miles wherever that is practicable to do. Now, of course, Brexit, there I've gone and mentioned the word, represents an uncertainty for the exporters of all food, not least, I should say, those exporting live shellfish to France and Spain, who now face the task of getting it over international borders. People producing everything from Arbroath Smokies to Stornoway Black Pudding currently benefit from Europe's scheme of protected geographical indications and need information about what comes next. And that's before we even speculate about what form CAP funding or an equivalent might take beyond the next couple of years for our lamb, beef and other farming sectors. And nor is that even to touch upon the stated concerns of the fish processing and soft berry industries, among many others, about the supply of labour in the future. But these uncertainties notwithstanding, the food and drink sector is confident about the growing interest around the world in the excellent product that it has to sell. James Withers, the Chief Executive of Scotland Food and Drink, said recently, by 2030, we want to have doubled the value of Scotland's food and drink industry. And this is Ambition 2030, the growth strategy which seeks to position Scotland as one of the best places in the world to run a food and drink business and to attract and retain investment. The goal is to double the turnover in farming, fishing, food and drink to 30 billion by 2030. And in order to achieve its vision, the strategy will focus on producing a coherent and joined-up education programme, development of a new national industry recruitment campaign, and creating a nationwide mentoring programme. Presiding Officer, a decade ago, the food and drink sector had a low profile in the Scottish economy, with hardly any growth in the industry. Today, it is one of Scotland's best-performing domestic and fastest-growing export sectors. I believe, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, that Scotland's Food and Drink Fortnight can claim at least some of the credit for that transformation, and I look forward to seeing it grow just as spectacularly over the coming 10 years.
Thank you. Can I remind members, if they wish to speak, they must press the request to speak buttons. I've also got 10 members wanting to speak, which is great, but it means you must keep to your time. I call Angela Constance, to be followed by Finlay Carson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to my friend and colleague Dr Allen for securing tonight's members' debate to celebrate everything that is fantastic and great about Scotland's food and drink industry, and of course to shine a light on all the fabulous local produce in our own constituencies. And in West Lothian, the food and drink industry supports 2,500 jobs associated with 60 companies. And I'm very pleased to say that I have on more than one occasion seen Dr Allen and other colleagues from across the political divide tuck into Hornick's haggis from West Calder in the Scottish Parliament canteen. And can I say to Dr Allen, some of the best homemade grub that I've ever tasted was in the Decker, a bed and breakfast in his constituency in Lewis, which I think makes the point about the connectivity between food and drink and our tourism sector. Now, I want to share with the Chamber, Presiding Officer, something that they were perhaps not aware of regarding my constituency. We quite rightly have a big focus on whisky. Glenmorangie and Glenturner have large bases in West Lothian. But there is also a rum distillery in Bell's Quarry near Livingston where artisan golden and spiced rum is produced, and it's very much inspired by East Africa in terms of its flavours and smells. And this is Matuga rum, which can be bought in Scotland or online. And I am very pleased to be able to congratulate Jacine Rutasika, who, along with her husband, founded Matuga Run. Jacine is one of the finalists at next week's Women in Enterprise Awards in the Startup of the Year category, and I wish Jacine well in that awards ceremony. Like others, I very much welcome the commitment to a Good Food Nation bill. We do very much need a joined-up approach to food and food policy to ensure that more of Scotland's larder ends up on our plates, that we do more to support this key growth sector of our economy, both in terms of exports and protecting and growing local jobs. But this industry also makes a contribution to tackling both hunger and obesity in today's Scotland. And given that Youngs and McRae's is also in my constituency, I should of course associate myself with any encouragement to get folk to eat more fish. Now, I very much support the government's efforts to end multi-buys in terms of food that has low or no nutritional value, but I do want to ensure that all of the proposals in the government's Health Eating Action Plan are evidence-based and don't disproportionately impact on Scottish SMEs. Partridge in my constituency, recently bought over by Burton's Biscuits, produce the #1 best tasting shortbread in the UK. They're a very innovative and ethical company, and they rely on promotions in supermarkets and free samples to boost sales of shortbread, particularly at certain times of the year, Hogmanay and Christmas being the most obvious example. Now, I'm not pretending that shortbread is anything other than a treat, but it has 17% sugar compared to 52% sugar in a Kit Kat. And where my concern is that the large confectionaries will continue to advertise, and of course the regulation around this is reserved, yet with our powers we may inadvertently affect those smaller Scottish-based companies. I know Mr Ewing's aware of this issue. He's been very generous with his time and has visited Partridge and the Public Health Minister has also been kind enough to meet me to discuss this matter further as well. And my very final point or sentence, Presiding Officer, is I'm very much in support of the desire to enshrine the right to food in Scots law. We have to end hunger in 21st century Scotland. I accept that it's comparatively easy to legislate, but the real thought and the real challenge is actually putting legislation into practice where we ensure that Wains in Scotland don't go hungry. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Finlay Carson to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Mr Carson, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you to Alistair Allen for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak in this debate celebrating what I believe is Scotland's most important and iconic industries. In my constituency of Galloway and Western Fries, food and drink is vital to our rural economy, and we have a whole host of fantastic companies developing new and exciting products. In line with the Scottish Government's Ambition 2030 strategy for the industry, Dumfries and Galloway Council have a programme very ably managed by Lorna Young to ensure that targets are met in the sector that is currently worth £1.2 billion to the region and one which employs over 9,000 people. It also now comprises a quarter of the private sector activity in the local economy, which is up from a fifth just 5 years ago. And in terms of gross value added, it represents £60,000 per head of population, well above the local average of £40,000. It's a pity I've only 4 minutes to speak, as there are so many wonderful individuals and businesses doing so much in the constituency. And earlier today, I was alongside the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall as they officially opened the new visitor centre at Bladnoch Distillery. I'm sure that the presiding officer will know it well. The Australian businessman David Pryor purchased Bladnoch Distillery in 2015 with a vision of restoring it to its former glory. And shortly after his significant investment, the distillery has resumed production and launched its award-winning range of Bladnoch single malts and pure Scotch blended whiskies. In 2017, Bladnoch celebrated its 200th anniversary, making it the oldest privately owned Scotch distillery. And let's not forget the crafty distillery just along the road which produces the now famous Hill and Harbour gin. I'm also thoroughly looking forward to attending the Stranraer Oyster Festival, and I know the Minister, Mary Goujon, will be joining us, which is now in its third year and getting bigger and bigger all the time. It's a fantastic event which brings the community together and showcases one of our finest coastal products. And if you've got time, I would certainly recommend you pop down. We also have a Kirkcudbright Food Festival coming up next month. We've had Wigton Food Festival in July, and add in a Dumfries Farmers Market every month at the railway station, and you really are spoilt for choice when it comes to getting fine local produce. In what is its 20th anniversary of Food and Drink Federation in Scotland, I was pleased to hear that they are offering 20 opportunities for youngsters within the industry. And one of those opportunities is at Sheena Horner's Galloway Chilies, a small but thriving business in my region. And the 20th anniversary programme has allowed Sheena to take on someone for work experience, and it's a really fantastic opportunity for the youngster involved. They'll learn about how to grow chilies in Scotland, as well as assisting in building 2 greenhouses for the 2020 season, and of course sharing ideas with partners and other participants in the Dumfries and Galloway Food and Drink Forum. As we've heard before in this place, Dumfries and Galloway faces huge challenges in keeping our young people in the region. So opportunities like this should certainly be explored as we look forward to bringing incentives forward to keep them here. There's so much untapped potential in growing our food and drink industry. And Dumfries and Galloway is home to almost half of Scotland's dairy herd, while we have almost a quarter of the country's cattle. I know we'll almost certainly miss out on some of our iconic products, but I must mention now the world-famous Castle McClellan patty, Marbury smoked salmon, Sulworth Brewery and their award-winning Galloway Gold Lager, Galloway Lodge Preserves, and today I met up with Cream of Galloway with their ice cream, and now their business, the ethical dairy company with their award-winning cheeses, and new businesses like the Five Kingdoms Brewery in the stunning Isle of Whithorn. Not to mention Galloway Mead, who's hoping to bring back this traditional mead to the southwest of Scotland. Less specifically, I should mention Kirkcudbright, famous for its scallop fleet and its high-quality beef that's from our Galloways, belted and otherwise. It's growing in stature and popularity. Deputy Presiding Officer, with potential to expand the sector, reckoned to be worth £2.5 billion in Dumfries and Galloway, this is a really exciting time for our business. With the South West 300 driving route, you can take in some of the most beautiful countryside, combined with the best food the country has to offer, all washed down with a fine dram. I look forward to seeing more of my fellow members enjoying Galloway hospitality, and I'll be more than happy to point them in the right direction.
I think you've given us enough places to go to. Call Stuart Stevenson, followed by Colin Smith. Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and let me congratulate Alistair Allen on securing this debate. Adding to his litany of his constituency interests, I first had spoots at Northton, and they were harvested within a mile of where I was eating them. Now that is cutting the food miles down. And it's interesting too, in my constituency there are unusual things. It's where extra virgin oil seed rape came to the fore, one of the farmers in my area. I too congratulate the 10th anniversary of Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight. We've got in Scotland wonderful seafood, of course, Scotch whisky and so much more. And my constituency has multiple fishing ports, farms, even 4 whisky distilleries, Knockandoo, Inchgower, Glenglassaugh and Macduff, providing high-quality products but high-quality jobs as well. We've got 4 of the 5 largest fishing ports in the UK, and we account for almost all of the UK's aquaculture production. Nearly 5,000 people work on Scottish registers of fishing vessels, 8,000 jobs in seafood processing, many of these jobs in both cases in rural areas. Scotch whisky employs 10,000, 7,000 in rural areas. Big numbers, but continued growth can see that being even more. The efforts of Ambition 2030 stand to be recognised. The contributions that our food and drink make to our economy is heading in a most positive direction. And when you eat and drink them, you're eating and drinking the most healthy food you could possibly have on earth. Food exports have increased by 111% since 2007 to 1.5 billion, salmon and seafood leading the way. And capital investment is going up across Scotland. We can see improved distilleries, new distilleries, refitted distilleries, new visitor attractions. In farmed salmon, it's up by 16%. Scotch whisky increased in value by 153 million to more than 4 billion. Export value has grown by 7.8%. 40 bottles of whisky exported every single second. That's 9,600 bottles in the time that I will make this speech. Our food and drink sector deserves to be toasted and to be celebrated. And Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight is an ideal expression of this, and I encourage the public to join in. I listened with interest to what Finlay Carson had. I've got a reference to the Oyster Festival in my speech as what the South might do. The spirit of Speyside in the North might be some of the things that we do in my area. It's important we continue to support local food and drink. It's a massive success story for Scotland. It's diverse, it's omnipresent, and I'm looking forward to tucking into some Scottish products later this evening to augment what I had as Scottish-sourced tacos at lunchtime. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Colin Smith. We're followed by Bruce Crawford. Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, President Officer, and thank you to Alistair Allen for tabling his motion, which has allowed this evening's debate to take place. I think providing MSPs not only with the opportunity to celebrate Scotland's world-renowned food and drink sector, but also to do our annual Food and Drink Fortnight sales pitch for our own constituencies and regions. And, President Officer, I fully intend to do just that and follow Finlay Carson and no doubt precede Emma Harper in highlighting the thriving food and drink sector in my home region of Dumfries and Galloway, a region where our farmers produce more than 40% of Scotland's dairy and where we boast a fantastic range of wonderful artisan products. As a result of the importance and potential of this sector, the local Labour-led council is committed to the development of a regional food and drink strategy that aims to double the value of the region's industry to £2.5 billion by 2030. An ambitious target, but one that the region is more than capable of realising. As a local council, I recall launching the Dumfries and Galloway Food Trail, which invites people to eat and drink their way around the natural larder of the region, produced by some of the most passionate people in the business. Companies such as Cream of Galloway near the food town of Castle Douglas, where David and Wilma Finlay are leading the way in ethical farming, proving there is an alternative to the export of live calves and producing some of the most amazing ice cream and cheese along the way. Or Loch Arthur, which I had the privilege as the chair of Dumfries and Galloway's Fair Trade Steering Group of awarding Fair Trade flagship employer status, helping to deliver Fair Trade status to the region. The food trail takes people behind the scenes of producers, including Annandale Distillery, which after 3 years is bottling its first malt whiskies, the peated Manor Swords and the unpeated Manor Words, named after Scotland's national bard, Robert Burns. I can personally vouch for the remarkable quality of both, despite their young age. And it's fitting that the co-owners of the distillery, David Thompson and his wife, Teresa Church, have now taken ownership of one of Burns' favourite haunts, the 400-year-old Globe Inn in Dumfries. Joining our craft whisky distilleries recently is small batch rum distilling at Ninefold near Lockerbie, and wonderful gin distilleries such as Ora and Dalton, Crafty Distillery in Newton Stewart, and Solway Spirits near Annan. And we have exciting new businesses in the soft drink sector too, including Scotland's youngest chief executive, 9-year-old Molly Ross McLean of Molly Rose Lemonade, and Gretna Green, who launched her second flavour and her growing range just a few days ago. The region also boasts some of the busiest farmers and community markets, from Wigton and Kirkcudbright in the west to Dumfries, Moffat, Lockerbie and Langham in the east. And we have some of the best food festivals and celebrations in the country, including the Stranraer Oyster Festival, which I'm proud to plug again this evening. I suspect one of 4 opportunities to do so. It celebrates not only Loch Ryan's world-class oysters, but also the area's culture and heritage. With outstanding restaurants, cafes, guest houses, hotels, and Dumfries and Galloway is the place to do business when it comes to food and drink, and it's playing its part in Scotland's food and drink success story. However, we are not without our major challenges. The region's food and drink sector, along with the rest of Scotland, faces the uncertainties of Brexit, which threatens our tariff-free access to markets as well as access to workers. And the threat to geographical indication status looms over products such as Scotch whisky, our nation's biggest food and drink export, an industry worth £4.7 billion a year. The economic importance of our food and drink sector is enormous. So too, therefore, is the potential damaging impact of Brexit. But the importance of the food and drink sector goes beyond its crucial economic importance. It impacts on our health, our environment, our record on animal welfare and our fight for equality. The lack of adequate access to food for far too many people exposes many inequalities in Scotland today. Although our food and drink sector in Scotland has grown, so too, sadly, has the scandal of food poverty. It's absolutely right that we celebrate the success of Scotland's food and drink, but we also need to rethink how we approach access to quality nutritional food in this country. We need to recognise that access to food is a fundamental human right. Well, I'm glad that this year's programme for government committed to introducing a Good Food Nations bill. There's still a lack of clarity about what that bill will contain. We urgently need bold, comprehensive legislation that puts tackling food poverty at its heart, and that includes a statutory right to food. So I hope the government will use this debate to commit to just that this evening. Because, Presiding Officer, in a nation that provides so much outstanding food and drink of which we're all proud, it is to our shame that tonight there will still be many children in Scotland who will go to bed hungry, and that is a scandal that we must end.
Thank you very much. I call Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Peter Chapman. Mr Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to be taking part in this important debate this evening. And like others, can I congratulate my colleague Alistair Allen on having brought this debate to the Chamber. As MSPs, the Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight gives us all the opportunity to highlight some of the marvellous food and drink companies in our constituencies and regions. Presiding Officer, you've guessed it, I'm biased when it comes to Scottish food and drink, because I'm up there with the view that Stirling produces some of the best in the country. Firstly, the Stirling area is home to two remarkable whisky distilleries in the shape of Deanston and Glengoyne. Furthermore, it's certainly not lagging behind with the emergence of new gin distilleries, with McQueen's Gin based near Callander and Stirling's Gin in Stirling's Old Town. Of course, rural Stirling is the home to many farms that make the area a major producer of high-quality Scotch beef, lamb and milk. In Scott Beef, located in Bridge of Allen, we have one of the UK's largest privately owned fresh meat companies, whose passion is to produce the highest quality, innovative meat products for the UK retail market. Also in Bridge of Allen, we have Graham's Dairy. This year celebrates its 80th anniversary. Graham's is Scotland's leading food brand, producing very high quality dairy products. Now, I recognise both of these places are in the constituency of my colleague Keith Brown, but I'm always trying to nick stuff off of Keith, so that won't make any change. Presiding Officer, I always consider Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight to be a positive opportunity to celebrate our marvellous produce, which has an unbeatable provenance. However, in this year of all years, I'm afraid it must also come with a serious warning. The elephant in the chamber is a no-deal Brexit, and it simply cannot be ignored. If the current Prime Minister succeeds in taking the whole of the UK out of the EU with no deal, it will leave the UK to trade on WTO terms. In such circumstances, the challenges for our food and drink industry will be stark and, for many, potentially impossible. Without a trade deal in place between the UK and the UK will be subject to export tariffs when trading with other countries, including Ireland, in just the same way as any other third country which does not have a trade deal with the EU. And that will include tariffs that could be punitive on products such as beef, lamb, butter and cheese. Presiding Officer, I do not think I need to emphasise just how serious a situation this would be for Scotland's farmers, food producers, retailers and consumers. And I want to finish with a quote from James Withers, the Chief Executive of Scotland Food and Drink. He said, "If you take lamb and sheep sector, a quarter goes to the European Union, so you face the potential of that market effectively closing, with huge tariffs suddenly payable on lamb. Even if we could increase their consumption in the UK, we wouldn't be able to absorb that amount. So the projections we see for lamb on the UK market is a reduction in the price of around 30%, which would have a disastrous effect. It would have the same kind of impact economically as foot and mouth in 2001. Make no mistake, a no-deal Brexit is a direct and specific threat to the future of Scotland's highly successful food and drink sector, with around two-thirds of food exports going to the EU, demonstrating just how valuable the EU market is. All of the great work to ensure that food and drink exports from Scotland reached a record high of £6.3 billion last year would be hugely undermined by crashing out of the EU without a deal. It's a future I dare not contemplate, and I hope colleagues right across this chamber would share that view. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Crawford. I call Peter Chapman to be followed by Emma Harper. Mr Chapman, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I register an interest as a partner in a farming business, as we cannot have a debate on the wonderful food and drink we enjoy here in Scotland without mentioning our farmers who help produce the raw materials on which a lot of it depends. And I also thank Alistair Allen for bringing this debate to the Chamber, because I relish any opportunity to praise the Scottish food and drink sector. And as I have often said in this chamber, the food and drink industry is one of Scotland's biggest success stories, and Food and Drink Fortnight is all about celebrating that. The Food and Drink Federation Scotland has published some incredible statistics to show the importance of this industry. 25% of the Scottish manufacturing workforce is within the food and drink industry, and this employs a staggering 45,000 people every year. And by 2024, it is estimated that the industry will need to recruit another 19,000 people to keep up with current demand. And we don't have figures for what Ambition 2030 could do for employment, but if we keep working towards it, it will have a tremendous impact. Now, I know that Stornoway black pudding, mentioned by Alistair Allen, is top class because I enjoy it regularly. But I particularly wanted to mention some of the great North East products that we have. The annual North East Scotland Food and Drink Awards celebrate the excellence of our products, and I would like to mention some of this year's winners. Rora Dairy have gone from strength to strength in recent years, winning 2 awards with their passion for creating simple, pure Scottish yoghurt on their farm at Peterhead. And I saw many people enjoying their samples at the Royal Highland Show, and the passion for their products is clear. Glengarry Distillery in Aberdeenshire is one of the oldest whisky distilleries in Scotland, dating back to 1797, and I am lucky enough to have it in my region. And like many others across the world, I find there is nothing finer than a dram. Glengarry Distillery and its products have been regularly awarded for their development and innovation over recent years. And, Presiding Officer, the list goes on. Mackie's of Scotland ice cream, oat cakes from Kindness Bakery New Deer, Macintosh of Glendaveney rapeseed oil, and Farmley eggs. And saying that, I must register an interest as my brother Robert and his family run the Farmley eggs business. And these are just a few of the recognised success stories from 2019, and it is clear the North East is the place to be for great Scottish food and drink. There's no doubt Scotland's food and drink has been a great success story over the last 10 years. But to keep that momentum going and to reach 30 billion by 2030, some key things need to happen. More young people need to regard farming, fishing and the food and drink industry as a career choice. And these jobs must be sustainable and well-paid jobs based on our primary industries being more profitable than they are now. A much fairer share of the profits and the risks must be achieved along the food chain. Too often we see all sectors of that chain extract their costs and an element of profit, leaving the primary producer too often with a price which means he is producing at a loss. And that business model must change. And we must do all that as we address our environmental footprint and move towards a carbon-neutral industry. Presiding Officer, no pressure.
Can I say, due to the number of members who wish to speak in this debate, I'm minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes and invite the member to move such a motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Are we agreed? Thank you. I now call Emma Harper to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak in this important debate this evening, and I congratulate my colleague Alistair Allen on securing it. Food and Drink Fortnight, organised by Scotland Food and Drink, is an excellent opportunity to showcase the best of Scottish produce from farm to fork. Scotland's food and drink sector is world-renowned for its provenance, its outstanding quality and its amazing diversity of delicious flavours. It is worth over 14 billion to our economy and employs 115,000 and then some people across Scotland, and this number is continuing to grow. Every corner of Scotland has its own unique brand of food and drink, and the south west of Scotland is no exception. In my South Scotland region, we have outstanding local produce from Galloway breed beef and award-winning cheeses at Ethical Dairy, which has been mentioned, and Loch Ryan oysters from Stranraer, which I too will be enjoying along with Minister Goujon at this weekend at the 3rd Stranraer Oyster Festival. We have huge companies like Seriously Strong Cheddar, Rowan Glen and Arla, and we have one-woman companies like Treats Darling, and even forward thinkers like the Station House Cookery School in Kirkcudbright, who do a lot of work with families and local producers. We have many South West outstanding food and farm festivals, ag shows and farmers markets showcasing outstanding local food and drink, bursting with flavour and creativity. I want to give a shout out to Graham Nicholl and Naomi Bruff. They are just two of the hard-working people behind the Dumfries and Kirkcudbright food festivals. Graham was the omelette-making champion in D&G until this summer, when I defeated him and took his crown, which I now have to defend on Graham's own turf. Members might be surprised to learn that in the South West Scotland, Garacher Tea Garden is growing and blending tea. Professor Podds is growing chilies for his sauces, and we have a wide range of award-winning dairy produce from amazing ice cream to specialist cheeses and yoghurt. Not to forget the world-famous and now PGI status Ayrshire tatties. We have local venison and a wide variety of lamb, hogget and mutton. We have the Best Little Bakery, who won the prestigious World's Best Scotch Pie Award this year. South West Scotland has award-winning Sulwith Brewery, which has been mentioned in Castle Douglas, outstanding gin distillers like Crafty in Newton. I believe I had a taste of Hills and Harbour with Mike Russell in one of the events in Parliament. And of course, we have the newly refurbished and reopened Blacknock Distillery, described really well, the reopening by Finlay Carson. I visited it on one of its other official opening days as well. And we have a new kid on the block, Ninefold Distillery, making Dumfries and Galloway's first rum. Galloway really does have it all. Since 2008, we have seen Scots exports increase by 56%, reaching over £7 billion last year, with our manufacturing growth rate for food and drink twice of that in the UK. Key to unlocking the £30 billion potential of the sector, as is the Scottish Government's target, is by supporting the workforce. Our farmers, fishers, growers, pickers and all those working in our agricultural sector need to be supported. I spent the summer recess visiting farms, attending agricultural events, food and drink events and speaking to people on the front line. And as my colleagues have mentioned in Chamber and I have talked about in previously, South West Scotland has 48% of Scotland's dairy farms, and many of their employees are EU citizens who have chosen to live, work and be essential contributing members of our communities. South West Scotland is one of the top food producing areas, and these EU workers are understandably concerned over the UK Government's actions towards EU workers. South West Scotland is one of the top food producing areas. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I ask the Cabinet Secretary for assurances that he and the Scottish Government will continue to do all they can to protect this sector and its hard-working people from the potential damage of a no-deal Brexit. I welcome Food and Drink Fortnight and would like to put my thanks on record to all those in the sector who come to Scotland and choose to work in it. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mark Ruskell, followed by Gordon MacDonald. Mr Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I also thank Alistair Allen for the opportunity to debate the topic of Scotland's food and drink tonight. I was very pleased to see a renewed emphasis on food in last week's programme for government, including the commitment to finally bring forward a Good Food Nation bill. And members may recall that it was in the debate on Scotland's Food and Drink Fortnight this time last year that Parliament succeeded in getting this bill back on the government's agenda, and I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to scrutinising that piece of legislation when it comes forward. Now, the Good Food Nation paper from 2014 is a genuinely good piece of strategy work, in my view. It does strike the right balance between celebrating Scotland's unique larder and our strong export sector, whilst also identifying the big challenges that exist for further action. And it spelt out the challenges of having, for example, some of the highest levels of diet-related poor health in the world, an urgent need to tackle climate emissions, a lack of resilience and competition in the food supply chain, and the deep-seated attitudes to food, which lead to poor habits and low expectations. And unfortunately, I believe we've made little progress on these areas in the last 5 years. And perhaps worse than that, we've stopped discussing our successes and failures together, passing off the food challenges we face to other portfolios like health and education. And that's why we urgently need this cross-portfolio legislation, and I hope that will come through this Good Food Nation bill. Now, there are solutions from my region that I would like to celebrate here tonight. So this week, I visited the HEAT project in Blairgowrie, who've established a food hub offering online ordering and collection of local food. And later this month, I'll be helping to launch a similar scheme by the Hub G63 in Drimmen, joining other hubs in Stirling and St Andrews, which bring consumers and producers together. And these projects are direct, community-led responses to the declining food offer on our high street and a lack of choice and access in many of our rural communities. Many of these projects have received funding from the Climate Challenge Fund, which is very welcome. And given the climate emergency, we should be scaling this fund up rather than down to do more work on food. But when I was in Blairgowrie, it was with some irony that the dire standard of food at Blairgowrie High School exposed in the Courier today, because it shows the urgent need to get quality local produce into public kitchens as well. The Excellent Food for Life programme, which engages young people in menu design, local production and wider food education work, has been very successful. And Perth and Kinross Council should learn from the success of Stirling Council in working with this programme, because it has delivered quality meals that are popular with young people and also within the tight budgets that the council has. We should also pay tribute to projects and volunteers working on the front line of food poverty, like the Gate in Alloa and Kirkcaldy Food Bank. And I've had incredibly moving visits to both projects to speak to both the users and the volunteers who work so hard. I remain then uncomfortable celebrating record turnovers and export figures for Scottish food when families are still going to bed hungry every night. There is a huge effort underway to provide emergency food provision in Scotland. And last year, the charity FareShare distributed over 1,900 tonnes of food to food banks, community kitchens, lunch clubs and other local charities. That's enough food for £4.5 million worth of meals. And we should bear in mind that this vast tonnage is actually just some of the spare food from our supermarkets and the wider supply chain. There's clearly enough food in Scotland at the moment for everybody. It's the access and the affordability that is the real crisis here. And it's why the importance of a right to food is so central and should be in the Good Food Nation bill. So, Presiding Officer, in welcoming Food and Drink Fortnight, we must also square up to these considerable challenges, join up the action between portfolios, and make our food system work for the health and well-being of everyone. And I look forward to the publication of the Good Food Nation bill.
Thank you. I have to say I'm fairly flexible about people speaking to motions in members' debates because that kind of drifted onto other issues. But, as I say, it's a members' debate, so there's more flexibility. I call Gordon MacDonald, followed by Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Alistair Allen for bringing forward this motion celebrating the many successes of our food and drink industries. In Edinburgh Pentlands, many of my constituents are employed by Burton's Biscuits, who have been manufacturing biscuits in Edinburgh since 1934. Burton's was recognised in an online survey as the 7th best biscuit brand in the world, and in recent years was awarded Export Success of the Year by the Food and Drink Federation. I'm also lucky to have the Edinburgh Beer Factory in my constituency, a brewery that won in 2018 2 World Beer Awards, making them the highest performing UK brewery in the World Beer Awards. Thanks to companies like Burton's and the Beer Factory, the industry is now worth a record £15 billion to the Scottish economy, and the sector is well on its way to doubling in value by 2030 to £30 billion. Fiona Richmond, the head of regional food at Scotland Food and Drink, has said that Scottish food and drink is the envy of producers from around the world. And she is right. Even when we look closer to home, the reputation of Scottish produce is such that demand for it is increasing, with 82% of Scottish consumers thinking we produce the best whisky, 76% the best beef, and 75% the best salmon. And well over half of UK consumers agree with them. As an Edinburgh MSP and the co-convener of the cross-party group in Scotch Whisky, it comes as no surprise to me, Presiding Officer, that this year's Food and Drink Fortnight was launched at the Scotch Whisky Experience in Edinburgh, given the importance of whisky to the economy. The Whisky Economic Impact Report in 2018 showed that the whisky industry is now supporting more than 42,000 jobs across the UK, including 10,500 people directly in Scotland and 7,000 in rural communities. The sector's contribution to the UK economy has grown by 10% since 2016 to £6.3 billion as a result of continued export success. Scotland's national drink now generates 2/3 of all the spirits gross value added in the UK. This success does come despite the industry continuing to pay here in the UK the 4th highest duty rates in the EU and one of the highest duties in the world compared to other spirit-producing nations. Presiding Officer, as we mark 10 years of the Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight and showcase Scottish producers and consumers throughout the country, it would be remiss of me as a convener of the cross-party group and independent convenience stores not to mention the vital role that retailers play, particularly independent retailers. For the last 2 years, the convenience store owners in Scotland have benefited from £550,000 of Scottish Government grant funding to build their capacity to develop a food-to-go offering for customers. This grant programme is administered by the Scottish Grocers Federation, and I am pleased to say that a condition for all applicants to the programme is that they must show a commitment to using locally sourced Scottish produce. So far, Presiding Officer, over 120 stores from across Scotland, including rural and island communities, have benefited from the programme. The funding has enabled and encouraged convenience stores to develop new businesses with Scottish food and drink businesses, and it allows local convenience stores to take advantage of the growing consumer demand for Scottish produce. To conclude, Presiding Officer, Scottish food and drink is one of Scotland's best performing industries. We are well on our way to achieving the target of being home to a sector worth £30 billion, and that's why we must support the sector by buying local and trusting Scottish.
Thank you, Ms MacDonald. And I call Gail Ross. Ms Ross is the last speaker in the open debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I would also like to thank my colleague Dr Allen for bringing this debate to the Chamber and allowing us to highlight the importance of the food and drink sector to Scotland, but also, as others have done, to champion some of the great success stories in our own constituencies, and I also do so without apology. With local food and drink now worth an estimated £1.3 billion, this is one of our most valued sectors. And, Presiding Officer, I'm going to get the B word out of the way right at the start. We know that there's going to be a real need for political will to be shown in the future to continue to support our Scottish food and drink producers, given the uncertainties that Brexit is bringing. And the last thing we want is for another business like the Sky Chocolate Company in Kate Forbes' constituency to be forced to close as a direct result of complications that have risen due to the mess of leaving the European Union. But I do want this to be a positive debate tonight. So, my hometown of Wick is home to the world's best whisky, not only in my opinion, but the accolade bestowed on Old Pulteney's 21-year-old by Jim Murray's respected Whisky Bible in 2012. And that was only the second time a Scottish distillery had won the coveted award, and only the third for a single malt. In other whisky-related news, Brora Distillery is to reopen and start production again due to a multi-million-pound investment by Diageo. Production of Brora ceased in 1983, and bottles of the whisky now change hands for thousands of pounds. Taken from the water that produced the famous gold rush in Sutherland, this is a much sought-after dram, and its re-emergence has sparked interest with whisky lovers all over the world, especially those abroad who can boast bloodlines leading back to the terrible clearances in that part of Scotland. Should your travels take you to Ullapool, a visit to the Seafood Shack is essential. I took the Minister for Rural Affairs and the Natural Environment, Mara Goujon, there in the summer, and she was very impressed. In fact, we were talking about it just again this week. They've got a simple menu based on the fresh seafood that comes ashore that day. I can thoroughly recommend the garlic crab claws and the monkfish or haddock wrap. If you're looking for something a bit different, Shore Seaweed are producing a nutritious snack made from local seaweed, which is sustainably harvested by hand on the Caithness shores. There is Bogrow Farm in Rossshire, a reasonably new producer who are already producing fantastic quality meat and vegetables for a local market. And thanks to Leader funding, they've been able to expand their business this year to develop a charcuterie and expand their butchery to meet the demand for locally produced quality products. And they are just one example of a food and drink producer who's been able to expand and develop thanks to European funding. Roaring Red Stag, whom I visited in the summer, is also developing into a thriving business, producing quality venison for the local and national market. But they did point out to me that they have found finding support with routes to market and development of their business a challenge due to the remote rural location. And that's something that I'm going to speak to James Withers about tonight. Presiding Officer, there are simply too many quality producers to mention in the time I have left. Lochduart Salmon, Scrabster Seafoods, Rockrose Gin, May Selections, Caithness Chocolates, Wolfburn Distillery, Highland Fine Cheeses, Glenmorangie Distillery. There are so many. And this list is by no means exhaustive, but the plethora of distilleries and breweries, the cafes, restaurants, farmers and crofters, bakers, confectioners and producers in Caithness, Sutherland and Ross. I'd like to finish to wish Dornoch Distillery Company, Scottish Salmon Company, Dunnet Bay Distillers, Highland Charcuterie and Smokehouse Limited, Khaleesi Partners, Stack's Bistro, Gilly Breach Restaurant, Greens Restaurant and Kyle's Q Hotel best wishes for the Highland Food and Drink Awards in November. Good luck to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if any members missed anything in their constituency. We had a good track naming everything. And now Colin Fergus Ewing to close for the Government Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I would like to start by thanking all members for contributing to the debate. I think just about every member in their speech mentioned the distilleries in their own constituency, so I join the club and would pay tribute to Tomatin and Royal Brackla and a new distillery which Gordon MacPhail planned to open in Grantown, which will be extremely welcome. And I'd particularly like to thank Alistair Allen for securing this debate and his reference to so many of the outstanding food and drink products in his own constituency. He mentioned the Isle of Harris distillery, and I should say that I did purchase there a barrel of whisky for my daughter for when she's 18, of course for the purposes of her education, Presiding Officer. And we did take her to see the barrel, which has her name enshrined on it, and she burst into tears because she didn't like the smell in the and said, "Dad, I want you to sell it for £20. I decided not to enter into a transaction on that basis, I have to say. But to be serious, today's debate is about celebrating the success, and I think all members have paid tribute well to the huge contribution that food and drink makes in their constituency, mentioning a long list of many of the companies, large and small, that contribute to the overall success of the industry. And we have an outstanding natural larder. We are the best place in the world for growing beef and lamb. Exactly the right climate, grass-fed, environmentally sustainable. And that message, I think, as Mr Chapman knows, is increasingly getting across at a time when I think farmers are sometimes subjected to somewhat unfair attacks. Yes, of course.
Richard Lochhead.
To link the Cabinet Secretary's comments about barley and farmers' contribution, to take him back also to his comments about whisky, I know he will agree with me, given his constituency interest, that Speyside is the home of Scotch whisky. And would he join me in paying tribute to James Campbell, who's the chairman of the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival, as well as a keeper of the Quaich, who has made such a success, along with his team, of that festival over many, many years, as have others before him, but also in particular pay tribute to James Campbell for helping to create and make a huge success of the more recent event in Murray and Speyside now called Distilled, where the distillers of whisky and gin and other producers are brought under the same roof at Elgin Town Hall, and that's become a huge success for locals and visitors alike. And will he recognise the enormous contribution that James Campbell has made?
You will understand that ministers can't take part in debates, so this is a technique of a very lengthy intervention, but your time will be extended for that, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I suppose that's the politician's equivalent of an illicit still, presiding officer. No, I do absolutely pay tribute to Mr Campbell and his amazing achievements, and as a member of the Keepers of the Quaich, my mother Winnie is a member of that illustrious and fairly select band of people, and she did once remark that their dinners were about the best that you could conceivably get. I would pay tribute to everyone who works in the sector. Many people have done this, different comments, Emma, Harper, Angela, Constance, and they're absolutely right. And we do need these people, and everybody is welcome in Scotland, wherever they come from, whichever European country. It's very important we get that message out. And just this morning I attended a food resilience committee along with James Withers, who's in the gallery, and representatives of the whole panoply, and we had a practical discussion about preparing for a no-deal Brexit. Not a political discussion, but a practical discussion, and it's extremely important we do so. And I pay tribute to the work that James and his colleagues have done, and the Food and Drink Federation, whose reception I hope and expect we will all attend shortly, celebrating their 20th anniversary, and doing a fantastic job in representing a sector in Scotland, which, as Dr Allen said, was 10 years ago not really receiving the airtime, the promotion which it now rightly receives. And of course, members referred to the Good Food Nation Bill. We've announced in our programme for government we plan to bring that forward, and I'm pleased that members welcome that. And we'll be publishing I think I've better concentrate on the job in hand. And we will be publishing shortly the result of the consultation responses, and I think there were over 1,300. So there's quite a thorough piece of work we've been doing. So I'm pleased to be able to... no, I won't. I'm pleased to reassure members in that regard. The success of the industry is well documented. The record turnover has been referred to of nearly 15 billion, record exports of 6.3 billion, retail sales of food and drink brands at record levels, and that's all as a result of tremendous hard work and close relations between the government, industry and third-party groups and communities. I want that to continue. And at the heart of that, as many members have said, is our iconic protected food names: Scotch beef, Scotch lamb, Scotch farm salmon, Stornoway black pudding. And these products embody our story, our provenance, our quality, our heritage. They're enjoyed by people all over the world. I was pleased that Angela Constance mentioned the haggis that's is cooked in the canteen. That's my favourite meal in the canteen. Absolutely delicious. So I hope you will relay that, Angela, to your constituents. Members have kindly referred to the programme for government, outlining, I think, around about 20 commitments from memory in all, including the creation of a new food and drink academy to support businesses with high growth potential, the development of a new e-commerce platform so that companies can showcase and sell products in international markets, developing a food and drink environmental plan, and exploring options to maximise the potential for the Scottish brand. More details on these will emerge over coming months, presiding officer. I would also like to acknowledge that, as Emma Harper said, small businesses play a vital role here. There's really an exciting emerging development of innovative, active, vigorous, entrepreneurial small businesses in the food and drink sector, and it's absolutely terrific to see these companies come forward. And members, Mr Carson mentioned some Mr MacDonald mentioned the contribution that the Scottish Grocers Federation made with their excellent programme Food to Go. And we're always looking to see how we can expand on that. And I spoke to John Lees about that just the other day. I would also like to say that parts of Scotland haven't been mentioned. Arran, for example, are increasingly renowned as having a niche and a premium for quality brands. And I was delighted to sample some of the Arran cheeses today from a young lady. And I asked if Alistair Dobson, Mr Arran, was present as well as her. And she said, that's my dad, actually. But I won't tell him you called him Mr Arran because it would make his head even larger. Presiding Officer, I'd just like to finish by paying tribute to all members for their contributions, but above all, for all the people, for the farmers, crofters, for those who are working in our catering sector, for our chefs, for those who are working in our hotels and restaurants, and generally everyone who works in the sector that are playing their part and are contributing to the success and the sustainable growth of a great industry that perhaps more than any other is associated with Scotland.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And I close this meeting of Parliament.